She wore red like she owned the room. And maybe she did. Victoria Langford stood at the center of Titan Automotive's most expensive evening in a decade. Glass towers of champagne, a fleet of cameras, a sedan wrapped in black silk waiting to be revealed, and she made a decision in under 4 seconds. She looked at the man near the entrance. Work boots, calloused hands, a little girl in pigtails gripping his fingers, and she decided he didn't belong. What she didn't know, what nobody in that gleaming room knew, was that without him, none of it would exist. If this story finds you tonight, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far it travels. And if it moves you, hit like before we're done. The invitation had been sitting on Adrian Vale's kitchen counter for 11 days. He'd found it in his work locker on a Tuesday morning, tucked beneath a folded shop rag and a pair of latex gloves he'd forgotten to throw away. The envelope was cream-colored, thick stock, the kind of paper that costs more per sheet than his hourly wage. Titan Automotive, Meridian Launch Celebration. Complimentary admission, Vale, A. No +1 listed, just his name and the date, and an address in the financial district he knew better than whoever sent the invitation probably assumed. He almost didn't go. That was the honest truth of it. He stood in his kitchen at 6:15 on the evening of the event, still in his work clothes from the day shift, smelling of hydraulic fluid and the particular metallic cold of the garage floor in November, and he told himself it was a bad idea 3 separate times. He had leftovers in the refrigerator. Lily had homework. The drive downtown would take 40 minutes in evening traffic. And for what? To stand in a room full of people he used to know and watch them celebrate something he understood better than any of them? Then Lily walked in. She was 6 years old and small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and a habit of asking questions that Adrian never quite had answers for. She was wearing her good dress, the navy one with the white collar that her grandmother had sent from Ohio last Christmas, and she was holding her gray toy car in both hands like an offering. "Are we going?" she asked. Adrian looked at her, then at the invitation, then back at her. "Yeah," he said. "Get your coat." The gray toy car went everywhere Lily went. Adrian had made it himself 4 years ago, in the 6 weeks after Elena died, when he needed something to do with his hands at 2 in the morning and couldn't face another night of sitting in the dark listening to the house settle. It was machined aluminum, 3 inches long, hand-filed to the proportions of the original design sketch he'd done on a legal pad back when he was 29 and still believed that the automotive industry was the kind of place where the best idea won. He'd engraved a serial number on the underside, a habit from his engineering days, cataloging everything, leaving a record, and painted it a matte gray that Lily had picked out herself from a hardware store color wheel. She called it the car. Not her toy car, not her gray car. Just the car, definite article, as though there were no other cars in the world worth mentioning. She'd had it so long the paint was worn thin at the nose and along the roof where she held it when she was thinking. Adrian had offered to repaint it twice. She'd declined both times with a seriousness that reminded him so much of Elena that he'd had to leave the room. He buckled her into the back seat of his truck, a 2009 Silverado with 240,000 miles and a heater that worked on the right side but not the left, and headed downtown. Titan Automotive's launch event was held in the main atrium of the Meridian Tower, a glass and steel building that had gone up on Fifth Avenue 3 years ago and immediately became the kind of place that showed up in architecture magazines and local news segments about economic revitalization. The atrium was 4 stories of open space with a ceiling that let in the city lights, and for tonight it had been transformed into something that stopped Adrian in the doorway for just a moment longer than he meant to. They'd done it right. He'd give them that. Soft lighting from fixtures suspended at varying heights cast everything in warm amber. Round tables along the perimeter carried flower arrangements in black and gold. A circular stage occupied the center of the floor, and on it, beneath a silk cover that pooled at the base like something theatrical, sat the Titan Meridian. The new flagship sedan that Titan Automotive had spent the last 4 years developing and the last 6 months marketing with the kind of money that made Adrian feel tired when he thought about it. He knew that car better than any person in this room, and that was neither pride nor bitterness. It was just fact. The way knowing your own handwriting is just fact. People were already thick inside. Men in suits that fit the way expensive suits fit, like they were made for a specific body rather than selected from a rack. Women in evening wear. The particular low roar of a crowd that is networking and drinking at the same time, where every conversation is also an audition. Adrian had lived in this world once. He recognized its rhythms the way you recognize a language you used to speak fluently and have mostly forgotten. He was wearing his cleanest clothes, which was not the same thing as formal. Dark jeans, no rips. A charcoal button-down that Elena had given him for their anniversary the year before she got sick. His work boots, because he hadn't replaced them yet, and everything else he owned was in worse shape. His hands were clean. He'd scrubbed them twice at the sink before they left. But they were still the hands of a man who worked with them, the knuckles roughened, the calluses permanent. Lily was holding the car in her left hand and his fingers with her right. "It's fancy," she said. "Yeah. Are these your friends?" "Some of them used to be." She considered this. What happened? "Things changed," Adrian said. "Come on." Yeah. They made it perhaps 15 feet inside the entrance before it happened. He heard her before he saw her, a voice that carried the particular quality of someone who had trained themselves to project authority, not loud exactly, but with a resonance that cut through crowd noise, the kind of voice that expects to be listened to and has been proven right enough times that it no longer doubts itself. "Excuse me." Adrian turned. Victoria Langford was 38 years old and had been CEO of Titan Automotive for 14 months, appointed by the board after the previous executive team's extended tenure ended in a departure that the press release called mutual, and the industry understood to mean something else entirely. She had an MBA from Wharton and a background in luxury brand management and a reputation for being exceptionally good at the part of running a company that involved rooms full of investors and cameras. She was wearing a red dress, the kind of red that doesn't apologize, with thin straps and a cut that made the decision to wear it feel intentional rather than circumstantial. Her hair was dark and pulled back, and her jewelry was the understated expensive kind, which Adrian knew was always more expensive than the obvious kind. She was flanked by two people. On her left, a younger woman with a tablet and a headset who Adrian correctly identified as an assistant. On her right, a man in a security jacket who was already looking at Adrian in the way that people in security jackets look at people they've been instructed to evaluate. Victoria's eyes moved over Adrian in the time it takes to breathe in. Boots, jeans, the collar of his shirt. Then to Lily, who was looking up at her with the uncomplicated curiosity of a 6-year-old who has not yet learned that some adults are performing. "Can I help you?" Victoria asked, and the phrasing was technically a question, but carried none of the architecture of one. "I've got an invitation," Adrian said. He reached into his shirt pocket and produced the cream envelope. Victoria didn't take it. Her assistant reached forward and lifted it from his hand instead, glanced at it, and murmured something Adrian couldn't catch. "This event is for Titan stakeholders and invited press," Victoria said. "Industry partners." She said the last part with a slight pause before it, a breath of emphasis, that suggested she was translating something complicated into simple language. "I'm aware of what the event is," Adrian said. "This is a high-security product launch." She glanced at Lily again, not unkindly exactly. There was no malice in it, but with the brisk detachment of someone categorizing rather than seeing. "We can't have... This isn't really an appropriate environment for children. She's well-behaved." "I'm sure she is." Victoria's tone did not change. It was the tone of someone who has already made the decision and is now explaining it. "But I think there may have been some kind of clerical mix-up with the invitation. These things happen. Marcus," this to the security man, "can you help these two find their way out? There's a cafe on the ground level. I'm sure..." "Mom." Lily's voice, quiet and directed upward at Adrian. "It's okay," Adrian said to her, then to Victoria. "If you check the invitation list, you'd see..." "I don't have time to check every..." "Then maybe take 30 seconds, Adrian said. His voice was level, not sharp, not raised, just even, in the way of someone who has learned that losing your temper in a conversation is the same as losing the conversation. "My name is on that list. I came because I was invited. That's usually how these things work." Something crossed Victoria's face, not quite irritation, but adjacent to it. The expression of someone who is being questioned by a person they have already decided does not have the standing to question them. Marcus, she said. The security man put his hand, not hard but unmistakably firmly, on Adrian's shoulder. Adrian looked at the hand. He looked at Victoria. He looked at Lily, who was watching all of this with her dark eyes and the gray toy car clutched in her fist, and he made a decision about what this moment was worth. "Come on, Bug," he said to Lily. "Let's go." They went. The lobby of Meridian Tower had a seating area near the elevators. Leather benches, a plant that was probably real, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at Fifth Avenue in the dark. Adrian sat Lily on one of the benches and sat beside her and said nothing for a moment, just watched the traffic outside move in its slow, predictable way. "Did she think we were bad guys?" Lily asked. "No," Adrian said. "She thought we didn't belong there." "Do we?" Adrian thought about this. Not the reflexive, reassuring answer, the instinctive parental smoothing over. He thought about it honestly. "Yeah," he said. "We do, in our own way." Lily looked at the gray toy car in her hand. She turned it over, looked at the bottom, turned it back. This was a thing she did when she was thinking, examining the car the way other children might fidget with a zipper or a bracelet. "Can we still get food?" she said. Adrian almost laughed, the specific, uncomplicated practicality of a 6-year-old. He pulled out his phone and started looking for a diner. They were there. Lily halfway through a grilled cheese and Adrian watching her eat and not thinking about anything in particular, or trying not to, when his phone rang. The number was internal, Titan Automotive's main facility line, the one routed through the downtown office. He stared at it for 2 rings, then answered. "Vale." The voice on the other end was Gerald Chu's. Gerald, who ran the overnight quality control team and who had worked with Adrian for 8 months without ever asking too many questions, which was one of the things Adrian respected about him. "We've got a situation at the warehouse, the Meridian prototype. Night crew found something during pre-show prep, and I can't reach anyone senior, and you're the only one I trust to. I'm off shift." "I know you're off shift. Vale, listen to me. Whatever it is you're doing, I need you here. The car is being wheeled out in," a pause, the sound of him checking something, "4 hours. And what my guys are seeing does not look right." Adrian was already reaching for his jacket. "Text me the details," he said. "I'm on my way." "All right." He dropped Lily at his neighbor's apartment, Mrs. Ferraro, 73, who kept a jar of hard candies by the door and had told Adrian at least a dozen times that Lily was welcome whenever, and drove back downtown with the radio off, thinking. The Meridian was Titan's first major flagship launch in 8 years. Everything the company had was riding on it. The financing, the partnership agreements, 2 years of marketing spend, a board that had been patient but not infinitely so. The car was being rolled out at midnight, center stage, to an audience of automotive journalists and investment partners and regional dealership representatives, and whatever went wrong at a moment like that went wrong in a way that was very hard to recover from. He parked in the service lot and badged through the maintenance entrance with his work credentials. Plain badge, the kind that opened loading docks and mechanical rooms and not boardrooms, and found Gerald Chu in the staging area at the back of the atrium, behind the temporary wall that separated the public event space from the logistics corridor. Gerald was a compact man in his 50s with reading glasses on a lanyard and the particular expression of someone who has been holding a bad secret for too long. "Show me," Adrian said. Gerald showed him. Chetuan. The Meridian prototype sat under its silk cover on the platform stage, wheels on a polished black surface that was itself on a hydraulic lift designed to raise the whole display 6 inches at the reveal moment. The staging crew had been prepping the lift mechanism when one of Gerald's guys noticed something in the undercarriage of the vehicle while lying on his back to run a clearance check. Adrian lay on his back on the cold floor of the maintenance corridor with a flashlight Gerald handed him and looked at what the tech had found. It took him perhaps 45 seconds to understand what he was looking at. Then he lay there for another 30 seconds, just looking, because sometimes when you see something that shouldn't exist, you need to give your brain a moment to confirm that your eyes aren't wrong. The Meridian used an integrated chassis system, a single structural platform that Adrian had spent 16 months developing back in his previous life, a design that eliminated the traditional separation between the subframe and the main body structure in a way that reduced weight by 11% and improved crash rigidity by a factor that had made the engineering team's safety department quietly very excited. It was, without false modesty, the best thing Adrian had ever designed. It was also, more to the point, the piece of intellectual architecture that had made the Meridian possible, the thing the whole platform was built around. What he was looking at now was a modification to that system that had been made during manufacturing. The rear suspension mounting points had been redesigned. Subtly, not obviously, the kind of change that wouldn't flag itself in a general inspection because it looked intentional, looked like a legitimate manufacturing decision. But Adrian knew the original specifications the way you know your own name, and what he was looking at was not the original specifications. The mounting bracket on the right rear had been widened and repositioned 3.7 millimeters from where his design specified, and the reinforcement plate behind it had been reduced in gauge, thinner steel, cheaper to produce, and the kind of change that would save, Adrian calculated rapidly, somewhere between $400 and $600 per vehicle at scale. $400 to $600 per vehicle. On a production run of 40,000 units, that was somewhere between $16 and $24 million. And the consequence of that change, under the specific loading conditions created by a hard right turn at highway speed, the physics of which Adrian worked through in his head in about 30 seconds and wished he were wrong about, was a bracket failure. Not every time, not even most of the time, but under specific conditions, conditions that occurred in ordinary driving, the modified bracket would fail. And when it failed, the right rear suspension would collapse. And when the right rear suspension collapsed at highway speed in a right-hand turn, he slid out from under the car. "How bad?" Gerald asked. "Bad," Adrian said. "Get me a toolkit." He worked for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Gerald kept everyone else out of the corridor, told the staging crew there was a calibration check on the lift mechanism, which wasn't entirely untrue since Adrian requisitioned the lift specs from the system tablet and cross-referenced them while he worked. He didn't explain himself to Gerald. Gerald, to his credit, didn't ask. Adrian worked the way he had always worked, which was with the same focused quiet that had made him difficult to collaborate with and very effective to employ. He didn't narrate. He didn't second-guess once he'd committed to a solution. He removed the modified bracket assembly from the rear suspension mount, replaced it with a salvage spec component from the parts inventory that matched his original design parameters closely enough to hold, not perfectly, but safely, which was what mattered tonight, and torqued everything to spec by feel and by memory, and then went back over it with a measuring gauge because feel and memory were not the same as verified. When he was done, he lay on his back under the car for another full minute, going over the geometry in his head. It would hold. Not forever. The salvage component wasn't rated for long-term use at production load, but for the duration of the evening, for the presentation and the press photos, and whatever test drive segment they had planned, it would hold. No one would be hurt tonight. He slid out and stood up, and his back ached in the specific way it always ached after floor work, the old compression in his lower spine that he'd had since his 30s. He handed the flashlight back to Gerald. "Done," he said. Gerald looked at him. "You want to tell me what you found?" "Manufacturing defect, suspension mount." Adrian peeled off his gloves. "It's patched for tonight. Someone needs to pull every production unit before delivery and do a proper inspection. Everyone. Not a sample. All of them. That's going to cost—" "I'm aware of what it's going to cost." Adrian looked at him steadily. "What it's going to cost if they don't is worse." Gerald nodded slowly. "I'll make some calls. Make them to someone who'll actually act on it, not someone who'll sit on it until after the launch numbers come in." "Understood." Gerald hesitated. "Adrian, who do I say found this?" Adrian considered. "Night maintenance," he said. "That's all." Night maintenance caught it. He picked up his jacket from the tool cart and walked back through the service corridor toward the maintenance exit. Behind him, through the temporary wall, he could hear the event starting to pick up. Voices, the clink of glassware, the beginning hum of a crowd growing toward the midnight reveal. Someone was at a microphone doing sound check. The silk-covered Meridian was waiting on its platform for its moment, not knowing, as objects never know these things, that the man who had just saved it from becoming a catastrophe was leaving through the loading dock without a name on any program or a seat at any table. Adrian pushed through the door. The November air hit him, cold and direct. He stood in the service alley for a moment, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the light pollution above the city that turned the sky a particular shade of amber after dark. Somewhere across town, Lily was asleep at Mrs. Ferraro's, probably with the gray toy car on the pillow beside her. He thought about the bracket, the $16 to $24 million it would have saved. The person who had made that calculation, who had looked at his design and found the place where the math could be adjusted, where a millimeter and a gauge of steel could be traded for margin, and had made that trade without telling anyone. He thought about what kind of person makes that decision. Then he stopped thinking about it because thinking about it wasn't going to accomplish anything tonight, and he was tired and his back hurt, and he had a daughter to go pick up. He walked to his truck and drove home. At midnight, inside Meridian Tower, the silk fell away from the Titan Meridian in a wash of warm light and applause. Victoria Langford stood on the stage in her red dress and said the things that CEOs say at moments like this. The words about vision and innovation and the future of mobility and what this car meant for the company and for the industry. And the cameras found her and the applause was genuine, and the journalists wrote notes on tablets and the investment partners permitted themselves small, satisfied expressions. The car was beautiful. You had to give it that, whatever else you thought about the situation. The Meridian was a genuinely beautiful automobile. The lines clean and purposeful, the proportions right in the way that proportions are right when they come from an engineer who also happened to understand aesthetics, who had spent months on the surface geometry because the surface geometry mattered. It sat on its platform in the amber light and looked exactly like the future that Titan had been promising. Victoria put her hand on the hood for the photographs. She smiled. Across town, in his apartment, Adrian Vale was standing at the kitchen sink, washing hydraulic fluid off his hands for the second time that evening and watching the water run dark against the white basin. His phone sat on the counter. He didn't look at it. He dried his hands on a dish towel and went to bed. He slept, as he usually did, on his side of the mattress, the other side undisturbed, the way it had been for 4 years. The clock on the nightstand said 12:22. In the silence of the apartment on the coffee table in the living room, his copy of the invitation sat where he'd left it, cream-colored, thick stock, the Titan logo embossed in the upper corner. Vale, A. It sat there until morning, and no one touched it. 3 blocks north, in Mrs. Ferraro's apartment, Lily was asleep on the pull-out sofa beneath a yellow blanket. Her navy dress hung over the chairback, her shoes placed neatly by the door the way her father had taught her. The gray toy car was on the pillow beside her cheek, just as Adrian had imagined. On the underside of the car, in letters too small to read without squinting, was the engraved serial number that Adrian had put there 4 years ago out of habit and grief, and the engineer's instinct to catalog, to mark, to leave a record of the things that mattered. TAP-2014-001-AV, Titan Automotive Platform, 2014. Design number 1. Adrian Vale. The first. The original. The car that the Meridian was built on. Lily's fingers were curled lightly around it even in sleep, the way they always were. The worn paint smooth under her fingertips, the weight of it familiar as a heartbeat. Outside, the city made its noise. Inside, she slept. The morning after the launch, Adrian Vale was back on the floor by 6:45. Not because anyone called him in, not because there was an emergency, or not a new one, anyway. He was there because that was where he went, the same way water goes downhill. Not from decision exactly, more from the accumulated weight of habit and the particular kind of peace that came from knowing what was expected of him. The garage expected nothing complicated. The garage expected him to show up, do the work, and leave the work behind when the shift ended. He had been doing exactly that for 2 years and 3 months, and there was something in the simplicity of it that he had stopped apologizing for, even to himself. He signed in at the maintenance desk, poured coffee from the machine that always ran slightly too hot and tasted slightly of plastic, and took his station at Bay 7. Bay 7 was the oldest workstation in Titan's downtown service facility, a converted commercial space 3 blocks from the main tower that handled warranty repairs and internal fleet maintenance. The lift was a 2003 rotary that had been serviced twice in the time Adrian had worked here and needed a third. The tool chest beside it was a communal one, which meant nothing was ever where it should be and you learned to check before assuming. The fluorescent overhead in the back corner flickered every 40 minutes or so, rhythmically enough that the guys had started calling it the metronome. Nobody had put in a ticket to fix it because nobody wanted to be the one who cared enough about a flickering light to fill out paperwork. Adrian didn't mind any of it. He'd worked in worse places. He was halfway through a brake caliper replacement on a company fleet sedan when Danny Rios came in from the side door with his jacket still on and his gloves in his hand, which meant he'd come from outside and not from the break room, which meant he'd heard something. Danny was 26, second-year mechanic, the kind of person who knew everything that was happening in a building before the people it was happening to. Not maliciously. He just talked to everyone and had the kind of face that made people want to tell him things. "You hear about the launch?" Danny said, dropping his gloves on the tool cart. "I was there," Adrian said without looking up from the caliper. A pause. "You were there? At the event?" "For about 15 minutes. "Huh." Danny pulled on his gloves, processing this. "They're saying it went well. Langford did the whole reveal at midnight. Journalists loved it. Stock's up this morning." "Good." Another pause, longer this time. "Gerald Chu was in early, like really early. He looked like he hadn't slept." Adrian said nothing. "He was on the phone with someone from quality control. I heard him say something about a production review, pulling units off the delivery schedule." Danny looked at him sideways. "You know anything about that?" Adrian set down his socket wrench and looked at Danny with the measured patience of someone who has decided on a policy and intends to keep it. "You going to help me with this caliper, or are you here to catch up on gossip?" Danny held up both hands. "Caliper. Absolutely, I'm just saying." "Don't just say," Adrian said, and handed him the breaker bar. They worked in silence for a few minutes, which, with Danny, was never really silence. It was him not talking, which was its own distinct atmospheric condition. Adrian could feel him working something out. "The thing is," Danny said finally, handing back the breaker bar, "Gerald doesn't come in at 5 in the morning for nothing. And he doesn't pull production units for a bad feeling, so something happened last night. And you were there last night." He shrugged elaborately. "I'm just doing basic math." "Your math is fine," Adrian said. "Keep it to yourself." Danny nodded, slowly, the nod of someone filing information away rather than accepting a conclusion. "Yeah, okay, sure." He didn't bring it up again that morning, but Adrian caught him looking twice, the way you look at someone when you're revising the picture you had of them. So, the problem with Adrian's situation, the specific structural problem that he had understood clearly when he made the decision 2 years ago, and understood no less clearly now, was that it required a kind of sustained invisibility that was harder to maintain than it looked from the outside. He had not gone back to the garage out of defeat. That was the version of the story that people would tell, if they knew enough to tell any version at all. The brilliant engineer who fell apart after his wife died, who couldn't face the pressure, who retreated. He'd heard variations of that narrative from the 2 or 3 people who knew enough of the history to construct one, and he'd stopped correcting them because correcting people about the story they want to tell is exhausting, and in his experience, rarely successful. The real version was quieter and less dramatic, and therefore less useful as a narrative. Elena had been diagnosed 18 months after Lily was born. Breast cancer, stage 2 at diagnosis, stage 3. By the time the first round of treatment was assessed, she had been 31 years old and one of the clearest thinkers Adrian had ever known. An environmental lawyer who argued cases with the focused precision of someone who had decided exactly which fights were worth having and committed to them completely. She faced the diagnosis with that same precision. She read everything. She asked questions that made her oncologist visibly recalibrate the level of explanation he was providing. She made contingency plans, and then made plans for the contingency plans. She also told Adrian, 6 months before she died, that she was afraid Lily would grow up not knowing her father because her father was always somewhere else in his head. "You're here," Elena said, on a Tuesday afternoon when Lily was napping, and the apartment had that specific afternoon light quality that Adrian still couldn't look at without it doing something to his chest. You're physically in the room, but you're always designing something. You're always 3 steps ahead of wherever you actually are. That's not, he started. I'm not criticizing you, she said. I'm telling you something because I need you to know it before. She stopped, started again. She's going to need you to be in the room, actually in the room, not the version of you that shows up between thoughts. He had not known what to say to that. He still didn't, really. But after Elena died, in February, on a morning when Lily was at her grandmother's and Adrian was in the hospital room holding Elena's hand, and the winter light came through the blinds in thin parallel lines, he understood that the engineer who had been 3 steps ahead of wherever he was standing was not the version of himself that his daughter needed. And the job that had made him that person, the 18-hour days and the problems that ate through sleep and the relentless pull of the next design challenge, he couldn't be that and also be what Lily needed. He wasn't sure those 2 things could exist in the same body. So he made a choice. He took a leave of absence from his senior engineering position at Titan Automotive, which became a permanent departure after 6 months, which the company handled in an administrative sense without particular fanfare. He had been employed as a contractor for the platform design phase, and his contract had run its course. The IP he'd generated was owned by Titan under standard work-for-hire agreements, which was industry standard, and which he had signed without much thought, because at 29 you sign things without much thought, and at 35 you understand why you probably shouldn't have. He got his maintenance certification renewed. He applied for a night shift floor position at Titan's service facility, which was far enough from the engineering division that nobody who remembered him was likely to walk through, and he got the position because his technical credentials were, to put it plainly, absurdly overqualified for the role, and the hiring supervisor had been thrilled without knowing why. He arranged his schedule around Lily's school hours. He was home in the mornings when she left and finished by 3 in the afternoon on most days, or by noon on the days he worked the early shift. He helped with homework. He made dinners that weren't particularly good but were consistent and nutritious. He went to the parent-teacher conferences and the school concerts and the Saturday morning soccer practice at which Lily had determined after 2 seasons that soccer was not for her. He was in the room. That was the whole plan. That was what it was for. He did not think about the engineering work most of the time. Or rather, he thought about it the way you think about a language you've stopped speaking, aware of its presence, occasionally finding words surfacing unexpectedly, but not actively engaging with it. He read trade journals sometimes, late at night after Lily was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of cooling coffee and reading about what the industry was doing. He kept a legal pad in the kitchen drawer where he occasionally wrote things down, observations, problems he noticed, solutions that presented themselves to him the way they always had, unbidden, while he was doing something else. He didn't do anything with them. He just wrote them down. The legal pad was half full. He didn't think about the Meridian platform design very often. He tried not to. He had given that work to Titan under contract, and whatever happened to it after that was Titan's business, and he had decided that making it his business would cost him something he couldn't afford. But last night, lying on his back under the prototype with a flashlight, he had known in the first 45 seconds exactly what he was looking at, known it with the specific certainty that comes from having designed something yourself, from having lived inside the logic of it long enough that any deviation from that logic registers not as a calculation, but as a physical wrongness. The way you can feel when something in your house has been moved without being able to immediately identify what. Someone had changed his design. Not improved it, not adapted it, changed it in a way that reduced cost and increased risk, and done so in a manner careful enough to look intentional to anyone who didn't know the original specifications by heart. The question of who had made that change, and what they had known, and what they had decided to trade away, that question had been sitting at the back of his mind all night, and was still sitting there now, patient and unignorable, while he worked on a brake caliper in Bay 7 and the fluorescent light above him flickered its 40-minute rhythm, and Danny Rios tried not to look at him too obviously. At 10:15, Gerald Chu came through the bay. He didn't stop. He made it look like a walkthrough, the kind supervisors do when they're managing up or managing visibility. the kind nobody reads too much into. But as he passed Bay 7, he slowed for exactly one step and said, without looking at Adrian directly, "Quality, 9 p.m. You know the room." Then he kept walking. Adrian kept working. Danny, across the bay, was very intently focused on the alternator in front of him. Utat. The quality control room was on the 4th floor of the main tower. Not the executive floor, but not the basement either. An in-between space that housed the compliance and testing teams and had the specific atmosphere of a place where the work was serious and the budget was not. Banks of filing cabinets, long tables with laptops, whiteboards covered in tolerances and test matrices. It smelled like coffee and the particular dry warmth of a room with overworked printers. At 9 p.m., the floor was mostly empty. Gerald was waiting at the table near the window with 2 cups of coffee and a manila folder and the expression of someone who has been carrying something uncomfortable all day. Adrian sat down across from him. He didn't touch the coffee yet. "How bad is the suspension issue?" Gerald asked. Not as an opener, as though they were picking up a conversation that had been paused, because essentially they were. "The patch holds for low-load use. Static display, low-speed test drive on a closed course. It won't hold under normal operating conditions long-term, and it absolutely won't hold under the specific loading scenario it was designed to handle." Adrian laid it out plainly, the way he always laid things out. "Hard right turn at highway speed with the vehicle loaded to GVWR. Under those conditions, the modified bracket fails. The failure mode is rear suspension collapse." Gerald's jaw tightened. "At highway speed?" "Yes." "How did this happen?" Gerald said, and the question had layers in it, the literal question and the larger one beneath it, which was, how does a safety-critical component get modified in production without anyone catching it? "That's a different question from the one I can answer," Adrian said. "I can tell you what was changed and what the consequence is. How it got through to the prototype. That's a chain of decisions I wasn't part of." Gerald opened the manila folder. He slid a single page across the table. It was a production change order, the kind of internal document that authorized specification modifications during the manufacturing phase. The modification listed was consistent with what Adrian had found: the bracket repositioning, the gauge reduction. The authorization signature at the bottom was a name Adrian didn't immediately recognize. He looked at it for a moment. "Mercer," he said. Not a question, because the name had surfaced in the last 24 hours from the part of his brain that filed industry information without being asked to. Richard Mercer, VP of Engineering Operations, brought in from a competitor 14 months ago, around the same time Victoria Langford took the CEO role. He'd read Mercer's name in a trade piece about Titan's new executive team and had not thought much about it at the time. "You know him?" Gerald asked. "Of him, not personally. He's the one who signed off on the production spec revision." Gerald tapped the page. "Listed it as a tolerance optimization." That's the language he used. Tolerance optimization. "That's not what it is." "No." Gerald closed the folder. "No, it is not." He looked at Adrian directly for the first time. "Who are you, Adrian?" Adrian looked back at him. "I mean that as a real question," Gerald said. "Not, I know who you are here. 8 months, you're reliable, your work is clean, you don't cause problems. But what you did last night," he shook his head, "the way you worked that suspension mount, you knew what you were doing in a way that's not maintenance experience. That's design experience, that's..." He stopped. "You designed this platform." It wasn't quite a question. Adrian said nothing for a moment. Outside the window, the city's lights were doing what they always did. Indifferent, continuous. "I worked on the platform," he said finally. "Before. Worked on it." "That's accurate." Gerald looked at him steadily. "The TAP system, the integrated chassis platform, the thing that makes the Meridian possible. That was you?" "I was part of a team," Adrian said, which was technically true in the way that the tip of an iceberg is technically part of the iceberg. "You're the team," Gerald said quietly. "I pulled the original engineering credit records this afternoon, the filing cabinet copy that predates the digital system migration. Your name is on the primary design document." The room was very quiet. The name that's in the current system is not your name, Gerald continued. He said it carefully, like someone who understands they are holding something fragile. The name on the official company patent record for the TAP chassis. It was updated during the documentation migration 3 years ago. Richard Mercer's name is on it. Something went very still in Adrian's chest. He had known, in the abstract, in the way you know things that are too uncomfortable to examine directly, that the patent documentation situation was not clean. He had signed a contractor agreement that covered the IP. He had left the company before the documentation process was finalized. He had told himself that the legal architecture of work-for-hire arrangements meant that the technical question of whose name appeared on a patent was largely irrelevant, and that the right thing to do was let go of it and move forward. He had told himself that. "Adrian," Gerald said. "Yeah," Adrian said. Just the one word, flat and without inflection, the sound of someone absorbing information they knew on some level and still weren't ready for. "Someone changed the records." "I heard you." "That's not a small thing." "No," Adrian agreed. "It's not." He picked up the coffee finally. It had gone lukewarm. He drank it anyway, because he needed something to do with his hands, and because the alternative was sitting with his hands folded on the table looking like a man at the end of something, which maybe he was, but he wasn't ready to perform it. "I can file a report through quality channels," Gerald said. "The suspension issue. I have to file that. I have no choice. That's a safety matter, and I will not sit on it. But the documentation issue..." He hesitated. "I don't know what channel that goes through. I don't know who's clean. If Mercer has been running this for 3 years, he's had 3 years to make sure the right people don't ask the right questions." "File the safety report," Adrian said. "That's what matters right now. Production units, all of them, full inspection before delivery. That's the priority." "And the other thing?" Adrian set the coffee cup down. He looked at the manila folder, at the change order with Mercer's signature, and the language about tolerance optimization, which was the most mundane possible way to describe something that could kill people. "I need to think," he said. Gerald nodded. He didn't push. He gathered the folder and stood, then paused at the end of the table. "You fixed it last night," he said. "You found the problem, and you fixed it, and you didn't tell anyone who you were or what you knew. You just fixed it." "That's the job," Adrian said. Gerald looked at him for a moment with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite admiration, something in between that didn't have a clean name. "Okay," he said, and left. Adrian sat alone in the quality control room for another 10 minutes. Then he took the elevator down to the parking structure, found his truck in the dark, and drove across town to pick up his daughter. Lily was awake when she shouldn't have been, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the gray toy car in front of her, a picture book open but unread, looking at the door when he came in with the expression of someone who had been tracking footsteps on the stairs. "You're up late," he said. "I had a dream," she said. Then, "Not a bad one. Just loud." He sat down across from her. The kitchen was warm and had the particular smell of a home that had been lived in for years, the layered smell of cooking and laundry, and the faint cedar of the closet near the front door. He looked at her in the overhead light, which was slightly too bright for this hour, and made everything look slightly more real than it felt. And he thought about Gerald Chu saying, "You designed this platform and the manila folder with Mercer's name on it, and the change order with the language about tolerance optimization." "Dad?" Lily said. "Yeah." "Are you in trouble?" He looked at her, 6 years old, dark eyes, her mother's directness. "No," he said. "I'm okay." "You look like when something is complicated," she said. He almost smiled. "I look like that a lot. More than usual." She picked up the gray car and turned it over, examined the bottom, set it down again. "Is it about work?" "Sort of." She thought about this with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered. "Is it fixable?" He looked at his daughter, at the particular angle of her chin that was his mother's, and the cast of her eyes in the light that was Elena's, and the quality of the question itself, which was something that belonged entirely to Lily, 6 years old and already interested in whether problems had solutions. "Maybe," he said. "I don't know yet." She nodded, apparently satisfied with this, and closed the picture book. "Will you tell me when you know?" Yeah, he said. I'll tell you. She slid off the chair and padded toward her room, then turned in the doorway. The car from last night was pretty, she said. Even from the lobby. Yeah, he agreed. It is a pretty car. She went to bed. Adrian sat at the kitchen table for a while longer. He reached across and picked up the gray toy car, turned it over, ran his thumb across the engraved serial number on the underside the way Lily did when she was thinking. The aluminum was warm from her hand. TAP-2014-001-AV. He set it down and went to the kitchen drawer and pulled out the legal pad. He didn't write about the bracket modification or the patent documentation or Mercer's name on a record that should have had a different name on it. He wrote what he always wrote when he sat at this table late at night. A problem. Not that problem. A different one. A new one. Something he'd been working through in the margins of his mind for weeks. A suspension geometry question that had nothing to do with any of this. An abstract puzzle that had presented itself to him while he was lying on the floor of Bay 7 one afternoon, watching the hydraulic fluid drain from a front axle and thinking about load distribution. He wrote for 40 minutes. Then he capped the pen and put the legal pad away and went to bed. 2 floors above the quality control room that Adrian had left at 9:30, in the executive suite on the 6th floor of Titan Tower, Richard Mercer was still at his desk. He was 52 years old, with the build of someone who had once been athletic and had made the transition to executive life without dramatically changing his habits or dramatically maintaining them, which meant he was neither soft nor hard, but somewhere in a middle state that he dressed carefully to conceal. His office was the kind of office that signals success, not ostentatiously, but unmistakably, in the quality of the furniture and the alignment of the framed credentials on the wall, and the particular angle of the desk that ensured visitors had to look slightly upward to address him directly. He was reading the quality report that Gerald Chu had filed at 5:40 p.m. He'd read it 4 times. Each time, the language stayed the same. Suspension mount specification deviation detected in pre-production prototype. Deviation attributed to change order reference TAP-MC-0047. Repair completed by maintenance staff prior to event. Full production inspection recommended. Change order reference TAP-MC-0047. His change order. He set the report down on the desk and looked at his hands, which were the hands of a man who had made a certain number of calculations in his career and was making another one now. He thought about the bracket modification, which he had reviewed and approved 14 months ago on a cost-per-unit basis, that had made the margin numbers look significantly better in a year when the board was examining the Meridian's projected ROI very carefully. He had understood the engineering trade-off. He was not ignorant of engineering. He had understood it and made the calculation anyway, on the basis that the failure scenario required a specific combination of conditions that the testing protocols were unlikely to generate. He had been, it now appeared, wrong about the testing protocols. Or rather, someone had found the deviation before the testing protocols had a chance to miss it. Someone had found it and fixed it and filed a report that used his change order number and would now, inevitably, be reviewed by people who would ask about his change order, maintenance staff. He picked up his phone and called his assistant. I need the service facility overnight logs from last night. Every badge swipe, every room access, everything. He got them 40 minutes later in his email and scrolled through the list. Vale, A. Maintenance entrance badge 2214, exit 102. He didn't know the name. He searched the internal HR system and found the file. Adrian Vale, maintenance technician, day shift, 2 years and 3 months of service. Prior employment listed as contractor work in the automotive engineering sector. References solid, performance reviews unremarkable. The photo showed a man with dark hair going gray at the temples and the kind of face that didn't volunteer information. Mercer looked at the file for a long time. Contractor work in the automotive engineering sector. He thought about that phrase. He thought about the way a maintenance technician would have to approach a chassis system to find a 3.7 millimeter bracket deviation in a pre-production prototype in the dark, on the floor of a maintenance corridor, 2 hours before a midnight reveal. He thought about what kind of person would know where to look. He closed the HR file. He opened a different window on his computer, the patent documentation archive, the one that had been migrated and updated 3 years ago during the digital transition, the one that now listed the TAP platform design under his name. He sat with that window open for a while. Then he closed it slowly and sat in the quiet of his office with the quality report on the desk in front of him and the particular stillness of a man who has realized that something he thought was safely buried may not be as buried as he believed. Outside his window, the city light sat flat against the dark. The Meridian was safe tonight. Someone had made sure of that. He didn't know yet what that someone was going to do next, and that uncertainty was a thing he could feel in his chest, right beneath his sternum, constant and unpleasant, like a splinter that hadn't been extracted cleanly. He reached for his phone again. He needed to make some calls. In Bay 7 the next morning, Adrian showed up at 6:45, poured his coffee from the machine that ran too hot, and took his station. The rotary lift groaned slightly when he brought it up, the way it always did. The fluorescent light flickered at the back of the bay on its rhythm. Danny Rios came in at 7 with his jacket on and his gloves in his hand and said good morning and did not for once ask any questions. The first vehicle of the day was a warranty repair on a fleet SUV with a coolant leak that had been traced to the lower radiator hose connection. Adrian drained the system, replaced the hose, refilled, and pressure tested. Straightforward, the kind of work that required his hands and a portion of his attention and left the rest of his mind where it was, somewhere else, working on something the garage didn't know about. He thought about the legal pad in the kitchen drawer. He thought about a suspension geometry problem that had nothing to do with anything, an abstract puzzle that was purely his. He thought about Elena saying she's going to need you to be in the room. He replaced the radiator hose and pressure tested the system and signed the work order and moved to the next bay. He was in the room. For now, that was enough. Gerald Chu filed the quality report on a Thursday. By Friday morning, it had reached the desk of Titan's chief operating officer, a careful man named Howard Briggs, who had spent 22 years in automotive operations and had the specific institutional wariness of someone who understood that a problem found before the launch is a problem, but a problem found after delivery is a catastrophe. He read the report twice, flagged the change order number, and forwarded it to the legal department with a note that said simply, "I need to understand the chain of authorization here before Monday." The legal department did not respond by Monday. They responded Sunday afternoon, which told Howard Briggs everything he needed to know about how the legal department had read the note. None of this reached Adrian directly. It moved through channels he wasn't part of, in rooms he didn't have access to, among people who had not yet connected the badge swipe log with anything more significant than a diligent maintenance technician working overtime. He knew it was moving because Gerald called him once, briefly, on Saturday morning, and said, "Things are in motion," and then said nothing else, and Adrian said, "Okay." And that was the extent of it. What reached Adrian was the work, which was what always reached him. The bay, the lift, the fluorescent metronome. Danny Rios on Monday asking if he wanted anything from the food truck outside, and Adrian saying coffee, black, and Danny coming back 10 minutes later with coffee, and also a breakfast sandwich that he set on the corner of the tool cart without comment because he'd noticed Adrian hadn't brought lunch in 3 days. Adrian ate the sandwich. He didn't say thank you, and Danny didn't require it, and that was its own kind of consideration. The public exhibition ran for 5 days after the launch event. Titan had converted the ground floor of Meridian Tower's attached retail space into a temporary showroom. 40 feet of glass frontage on Fifth Avenue. The Meridian Sedan on a low rotating platform at the center, lit from below with soft amber that made it look like something from a different atmosphere. Around the perimeter, display panels explaining the engineering, the safety ratings, the performance figures. A QR code at the entrance that linked to a 3-minute video of Victoria Langford walking through the vehicle's features with the specific practiced ease of someone who has done 30 takes and selected the one where she sounds unrehearsed. The showroom was open to the public, free of charge, 9 to 6. The theory being that anyone who walked through and touched the leather seats and sat behind the wheel would be a future customer, or would tell someone who would be, which was the same thing with a longer timeline. Adrian had not intended to bring Lily there. It was a Wednesday, her school was closed for a district professional day, and he had the early shift which put him off at noon. and Lily had been asking about the car since the night of the launch with the persistence of a child who has identified something beautiful and wants to get closer to it. He had said maybe twice and then said, okay, and then found himself walking through the glass doors of the showroom at 12:40 with Lily holding his left hand and the gray toy car in her right. The showroom was moderately busy for a Wednesday afternoon. A mix of the curious and the professionally interested, a few families, a couple who were clearly there for the air conditioning as much as the vehicle. A young woman near the entrance with a Titan badge was answering questions from a man in a canvas jacket who was taking notes. Lily walked straight to the car. She didn't run because Adrian had taught her not to run in places where things could be knocked over. But she walked with the focused directness of someone who knows exactly where they're going and considers everything else in the room to be scenery. She stopped at the edge of the low platform and looked up at the meridian with both hands at her sides and her expression very still. Adrian stopped beside her. "It's bigger in person," she said. "Most things are." She turned to look at him and then back at the car. "Did you make this?" The question landed differently than it might have, because of everything that had happened in the last week. He looked at the meridian's clean lines, the geometry of the front fascia, the proportions he had spent months on. Not the surface design, that was someone else's work, a design team that had done a good job, but the underlying architecture, the way the body sat on the platform, the reason the proportions worked. You could see it if you knew where to look. The rear haunches sat exactly where they sat because of the chassis geometry. The greenhouse had the angle it had because of the suspension packaging space beneath it. The whole visual identity of the vehicle was downstream of structural decisions he had made in a room with a legal pad and a laptop and too much coffee when he was 29. "I helped," he said. Lily looked at him with the expression she used when she thought he was being technically accurate, in a way that avoided the real answer. She'd had that expression since she was 4.5, and it looked more like Elena every year. "Okay," she said, deciding not to push it. She held the gray toy car up next to the Meridian's door panel, comparing them. The aluminum toy and the full-scale sedan. The proportion was different, but something in the line of the roofline was the same. Not obviously, not in a way a non-engineer would notice, but the relationship between the greenhouse height and the rear deck had an echo of the toy's geometry that was not coincidence and was not something Adrian could explain without explaining more than he wanted to. He had designed the toy the way he designed everything, from the proportions first. "They look like family," Lily said. "Yeah," Adrian said. "They do." But it happened 20 minutes later. Lily was sitting in the driver's seat of the Meridian. The showroom model was accessible, doors open, with a Titan staff member nearby to ensure nobody put their feet on the upholstery. And Adrian was standing on the far side of the car, looking at the interior trim when he heard the gray toy car hit the floor. The sound was small. Aluminum on polished concrete, a distinct light knock that was easy to miss in a room with ambient music and foot traffic. But Lily heard it and immediately slid out of the seat and went around the front of the car to where the toy had rolled, which was under the platform edge, close to the base of the display system. She got to it before Adrian did, picked it up, checked it over the way she always did. Satisfied it was intact, she turned it over to look at the bottom, which was her habit, and then stood up. The man was already crouching near the platform, examining the underside of the display base, which was a mounted detail panel showing a cross-section of the TAP chassis system, the kind of educational display that automotive shows use to make engineering accessible to non-engineers. He was 60, perhaps 62, with the silver hair and upright posture of someone who had spent years in rooms where posture signaled standing. He wore a dark suit that traveled well, the kind of suit that doesn't wrinkle on long flights, and he had the unhurried quality of a man who moved at whatever pace he chose because nothing in his professional life required him to move at anyone else's. His name was Werner Haas, and he was the Chief Technology Officer of Vantage Automotive Group, headquartered in Stuttgart, which was one of 4 companies in the world capable of licensing Titan Automotive's platform technology, and one of 2 that had been in preliminary discussions with Titan about doing exactly that. He was in New York for 3 days. Meetings in the morning, the showroom in the afternoon, because he genuinely liked looking at cars and found that looking at them in person told you things that spec sheets didn't. He had been examining the chassis cross-section display when the small aluminum toy rolled past his foot. He picked it up before Lily could reach it. He looked at it properly, which is to say with attention, turning it in his fingers the way an engineer turns something, not to perform examination, but to actually examine. His eyes went to the roofline first, then to the proportions, then to the underside. He went very still. Lily had come around to his side and was looking up at him with her hand out for the car. He looked at the serial number. He read it. He read it again, the way you read something when your brain refuses to accept the first reading as accurate. TAP-2014-001-AV. Werner Haas had been in the automotive industry for 31 years. He had spent the last decade at a level of the industry where platform architecture was not an abstraction but a subject of intense strategic interest, where knowing who designed what and when and under what arrangement was the difference between a licensing negotiation that worked and one that didn't. He had read about the TAP platform extensively in the years since it had emerged as the backbone of Titan's product strategy. He had read the patent documentation. He knew the name listed on that documentation. The serial number he was looking at did not match that name. He looked up. The little girl was still waiting for her toy, hand outstretched, patient in the way of children who have been taught to wait. And behind her, walking around the front of the meridian with the unhurried pace of someone who is not in a hurry because they have nowhere to be, was a man he had never met. Dark hair, gray at the temples, calloused hands. The quiet, slightly compressed way of moving that Werner associated with engineers who were also physical. People who thought and made at the same time, who built things with their hands as well as their minds. The face of someone who was used to being in a room and not being its center of gravity. Werner Haas looked at the man. He looked at the serial number, a V. He said carefully to the little girl, "Is this yours?" "Yes, sir," Lily said. "It's a beautiful object," Werner said. He held it out to her. She took it. "Did someone make this for you?" Lily looked at Adrian, who had reached them and was looking at Werner with the specific neutral expression he wore when he was reading a situation. "My dad made it," she said. Werner looked at Adrian. "The TAP platform," Werner said. Just those 3 words, flat and direct, no question mark. The air between them changed. Adrian did not answer immediately. He held Werner's gaze with the settled patience of someone who has known a conversation was coming and has decided in advance to let it arrive at its own speed, rather than trying to redirect it. "We haven't met," Werner said. He extended his hand. "Werner Haas, Vantage Group." Adrian shook it. "Adrian Vale." Werner nodded slowly. "Mr. Vale," he said, in the particular tone of someone confirming something to themselves rather than communicating something new. "I've been looking at your chassis display for the last 20 minutes. It's not," Adrian started, then stopped. "It's yours," Werner said simply. "The documentation says otherwise, but that," he nodded toward the gray toy car in Lily's hand, "says something else. TAP-2014-001-AV. That's an engineering catalog number. That's a design log number." He looked at Adrian steadily. "I've been in this industry long enough to know when I'm looking at the original and when I'm looking at a copy. The name on Titan's patent record is not a name I've ever associated with engineering of this quality." Adrian said nothing. "I'm staying at the Callaway on Park," Werner said. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card. Heavy stock, minimal text, the Vantage Group logo in dark blue. "If you would be willing to have a conversation, a private one, at your convenience, I would appreciate the opportunity." He held the card out. Adrian looked at it. He thought about Gerald Chu and the manila folder and Mercer's name on a document that should have had a different name on it. He thought about the quality report moving through channels on a timeline he wasn't in control of, among people whose interests he couldn't fully map. He thought about the suspension bracket and the $16 to $24 million and the specific kind of moral calculation that produces a tolerance optimization memo. He took the card. "I'll be in touch," he said. Werner nodded. He looked at Lily and at the gray car in her hand. Take good care of that, he said to her. I always do, Lily said. Sam. Adrian did not call Werner Haas that evening. He put the card on the kitchen counter next to the Titan invitation, which was still there. The two pieces of cardstock side by side, one cream and one dark blue, the only evidence on the surface of his life that anything out of the ordinary had happened in the past week. He made dinner, which was pasta because it was fast and Lily liked it, and he let Lily talk about her day, which had involved a disagreement with her friend Maya about whose turn it was to name the class hamster, and the resolution of that disagreement by a teacher who had declared that both names, Lily's suggestion of Bolt and Maya's suggestion of Mr. Peanut, would be used interchangeably, which Lily felt was unsatisfying but fair. He listened to all of this with his whole attention. He asked follow-up questions. He was in the room. After dinner, he washed the dishes while Lily did 40 minutes of reading. A chapter book about a girl who fixed robots, which Adrian had found at a used bookstore and bought without overthinking it. And when she was done, he sat with her on the couch for 20 minutes while she showed him a drawing she'd made of the Meridian from memory, which was not accurate in its proportions but caught something true in the overall impression of the car, a quality he found unexpectedly moving. It's good, he said, and meant it. She taped it to the refrigerator. He tucked her in at 8:30 and sat at the kitchen table with Werner's card and his cold coffee and the legal pad, and thought about what it meant that a senior executive at a major automotive group had read the number on the bottom of a toy car and understood in under 2 minutes what Titan Automotive's internal records obscured. The toy car was on Lily's pillow, as always. He couldn't see it from where he sat, but he knew it was there. He called Werner Haas on Thursday morning from the parking lot of the service facility, sitting in his truck before the shift started. Werner answered on the second ring. Mr. Vale? I've got about 20 minutes before I need to be on the floor, Adrian said. Then I'll be direct, Werner said, and Adrian appreciated this about him immediately. I've done some research since yesterday. Background verification on the TAP platform development timeline. I have access to resources that allow me to check original filing dates, contractor agreements, pre-patent documentation. The picture I'm assembling does not match the picture that Titan's official record presents. Okay, Adrian said. The modification history of the patent record shows an amendment filed 3 years ago during Titan's document digitization process. The amendment changed the primary inventor designation. The original contractor agreement, which I was able to locate through an industry IP archive, lists your name as the primary design engineer for the TAP integrated chassis platform. Adrian watched a sparrow land on the hood of the truck, look around, and leave. That's consistent with what I know, he said. I need to ask you something directly, and I'd like a direct answer. A pause. Are you aware that your design was used as the basis for the Meridian without proper attribution or compensation? I was aware the attribution situation was complicated, Adrian said. I didn't know the specific nature of the amendment until recently. And the suspension modification, the one that was repaired before the launch. Another pause. Was that you? Adrian said nothing for a moment. The quality report identified maintenance staff, Werner said. I spoke with a contact at Titan this morning. The badge log from that night shows one maintenance employee in the staging area between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. Your name? I found a problem, Adrian said. I fixed it. That's the job. Mr. Vale. Werner's voice was even, but something moved in it. You found a safety-critical defect in a vehicle whose platform you designed, repaired it the night before a major public launch, filed no credit, sought no recognition, and went back to your shift the next morning. Yes. A long pause. Why? Werner asked. Adrian thought about how to answer that. There were several true answers and none of them were simple. There was Elena's voice saying she's going to need you to be in the room. There was the sparrow that had landed on his truck and left. There was the particular quality of Bay 7 in the early morning, the coffee from the machine that ran too hot, the fluorescent metronome. Because someone needed to, he said finally. Werner was quiet for a moment, then, I'm going to make some calls. I think you should know that what I'm seeing from the outside is enough to warrant serious scrutiny of Titan's IP record. That scrutiny is going to happen whether or not you initiate it. The question is whether it happens in a way that serves your interests or happens around you. I appreciate the warning. It's not a warning, Werner said. It's an offer. I have a meeting with Titan's board chair next week, a scheduled licensing discussion. If you want, I can ensure that what I know is part of that conversation, in a formal capacity. Adrian looked at the service facility entrance. Danny Rios was coming through the side door, jacket on, gloves in hand. Let me think about it, Adrian said. Take the time you need. A brief pause. But not too much of it. These things have a way of moving on their own once they start. Understood. Adrian opened his truck door. Thank you, Mr. Haas. Werner, the man said, and don't thank me yet. The thing about Mercer was that he was not stupid. He was not a good person, or at least he had made choices that removed goodness as a relevant descriptor. But he was sharp in the way of men who have spent decades in competitive environments and have calibrated their instincts for institutional survival. He knew when something was moving toward him, and he knew the difference between a problem he could manage and one he could not. By Thursday afternoon, he had learned about Werner Haas's visit to the showroom. His source was the young woman with the Titan badge who had been answering questions near the entrance. She'd noted the Vantage Group executive in the visitor log and mentioned it to her supervisor, who mentioned it to his supervisor. And the chain moved in the way that information moves in a hierarchical organization, upward, with some distortion at each level. What reached Mercer was that Werner Haas had spent time at the showroom and had spoken with a maintenance employee and his daughter. Mercer sat with this information and turned it the way Werner had turned the toy car, examining it from different angles, feeling for the places where something might catch. He pulled the badge log again. Vale. A. The same name he'd looked up 4 days ago. He looked at the file photo for the second time. The face told him nothing new. He made a call to an attorney he kept on retainer for matters he preferred not to run through Titan's legal department. I may have an IP situation developing, he said. Old contractor agreement. Pre-digitization. Define old, the attorney said. 12 years. The contractor is still associated with the company in a different capacity. A pause. How different? Maintenance staff. The attorney took a moment with this. Is the contractor aware of the situation? Unknown, possibly becoming aware. Then time is a factor, the attorney said. If this goes to a patent challenge, the filing dates matter. If there's a documentation amendment issue, there may be, Mercer said. The attorney's tone did not change, which was one of the things Mercer paid him for. You need to think about whether your preferred outcome here is containment or mitigation, because those require different approaches and they need to be decided before the other party makes a move. Mercer looked at the badge photo of Adrian Vale, the quiet face, the unreadable expression. Containment, he said, for now. Then you need to understand what the other party knows and how they know it. And you need to make sure that whatever documentation trail exists is reviewed. I understand. I'd like to see the original contractor agreement before we go further. I'll have it to you by end of day. He hung up. He sat for a moment in the particular stillness of his office, which was a room designed for confidence, and which felt, at this moment, like something else. He thought about the production change order. He thought about $16 to $24 million in margin, which had looked like a clean decision at the time, and now looked like a thing that had a cost he hadn't fully calculated. He thought about a maintenance technician on the floor of a staging corridor at 11 p.m., finding exactly what was wrong with exactly the thing that shouldn't have been wrong with it. He thought about what kind of person does that without announcing themselves. He didn't like the answer. On Friday, a woman named Carol Voss appeared at the service facility. She was from Titan's HR department, not the day-to-day HR, the compliance division, which had a different address and a different energy, the particular careful energy of people whose job is to manage events that the company would prefer not to become events. She asked at the front desk for Adrian Vale and was directed to Bay 7, where Adrian was replacing a serpentine belt on a fleet crossover. Mr. Vale, she said, do you have a few minutes? He looked at her. The HR badge. The careful posture. The manila folder she was carrying, which was not the same as Gerald Chu's folder but occupied the same category of object. The thing that contains information someone wants to manage. Sure, he said. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and came out from behind the crossover. Carol Voss led him to the small conference room adjacent to the facility manager's office, which was technically not a private space but functioned as one. She sat across the table from him and opened her folder and said, with the practiced neutrality of someone reading from a script they've internalized, "We're doing a routine review of maintenance staff records. It's a quarterly process, nothing specific." "What do you actually want to ask me?" Adrian said. She paused. "I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between a quarterly review and a specific inquiry," he said. He said it without heat, without accusation, just matter of fact, the way he said most things. Carol Voss looked at him for a moment. Then she set the prepared script aside, not literally, but in the sense that her posture changed slightly. The performed neutrality recalibrated towards something closer to actual conversation. "We're trying to understand the circumstances around the quality issue identified before last week's launch. The report references maintenance staff, and your badge log places you in the area." "I filed no report," Adrian said. "Gerald Chu filed the report." "We're aware. We're trying to understand the full picture." "The full picture is that a safety-critical defect was identified and repaired. The quality report covers that." "Can you tell me how you identified the defect?" Adrian looked at her. He thought about Werner Haas's card on his kitchen counter. He thought about the attorney Mercer was probably already talking to. He thought about the pace of things, the pace that Werner had warned him about, things moving on their own once they start. "I know that platform," he said. "I know how it was designed. I know what the original specifications were, and I could see the deviation." Carol Voss wrote something down. "When you say you know how it was designed, I mean what I said." She wrote something else. She was being careful with him, which told him something about how careful she'd been instructed to be. She wasn't hostile. She was just navigating, trying to find the edges of something without knowing exactly how large it was. "Mr. Vale," she said, "is there anything you want to formally put on record at this time regarding your involvement with Titan Automotive beyond your current maintenance role?" The question was very carefully worded. He recognized the care in it. Someone in legal had written that question. He thought about Werner's offer, the board meeting next week. These things have a way of moving on their own once they start. "Not at this time," he said. She nodded and closed her folder. They both stood. At the door she stopped and turned. "The work you did the night of the launch," she said, and this time it sounded less scripted, more like her own voice. "Whatever the circumstances, it was important. People could have been hurt." "I know," Adrian said. She left. He went back to the Serpentine Belt. He called Werner Haas from the same parking lot that evening at 5:15, sitting in his truck while the sky went from gray to the particular amber that followed it this time of year. "HR came to see me today," he said. "That was faster than I expected," Werner said. "They know something is in motion. They asked what I want on record. I said nothing, for now." "Smart. If you put anything on record through Titan's internal channels at this stage, they control the framing." "I know." Adrian watched a delivery truck pull into the lot, back out, leave. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the board meeting." "And?" Adrian looked at his hands on the steering wheel, the calloused knuckles, the work that was visible on them. He thought about the legal pad in the kitchen drawer, half full. He thought about the patent document with the wrong name on it, and the bracket with the wrong dimensions, and the $16 to $24 million in margin, and the specific moral universe in which those decisions existed. "Do what you think is right," he said. "Put what you know in front of the board. But," he paused, "don't do it for me. Do it because the record is wrong, and wrong records in a safety-critical industry have consequences." Werner was quiet for a moment. "That's an unusual position," he said finally. "It's the only one I've got," Adrian said. "All right," Werner said, "but the meeting is Tuesday. Whatever I present will be accurate and will be based on documentation I can stand behind. I want you to know that." "I do know that." "Is there anything you want me to say on your behalf?" Adrian thought about this for a long moment. He thought about the night of the launch, the cold floor of the maintenance corridor, the flashlight, the bracket that was wrong and needed to be right. He thought about Lily asleep at Mrs. Ferraro's with the gray toy car on the pillow. He thought about the drawing on the refrigerator, the meridian from memory, the proportions off but something true in the impression. Tell them, he said slowly, that the design was built to keep people safe, and that it was changed in a way that violated that. That's what matters. The name on the document, that's secondary. The safety is primary. I'll tell them that, Werner said. And Werner, Adrian said, yes. If they ask where you got the information, you can give them my name. A pause. Are you sure? Adrian looked at the service facility entrance. Through the glass, he could see the lights of the bay, the lift in Bay 7 in its lowered position, the end of the day. Yeah, he said. I'm sure. He picked Lily up from Mrs. Ferraro's at 6:15. She was at the kitchen table again, but this time doing homework, the gray toy car positioned at the top of the page like a paperweight. Mrs. Ferraro was at the counter, doing something with pasta, which she pressed on them in a container despite Adrian's protests, and Lily put her homework in her backpack with the particular deliberateness of a child who intends to be done with homework for the day. In the truck on the way home, Lily held the gray car out the window for a moment, not in the stream of air, just holding it up, and then brought it back inside and looked at the bottom. Dad? She said. Yeah. That man at the car show, the one with the gray hair. What about him? He looked at the bottom of the car for a really long time. He did. Why? Adrian drove. The city moved around them in its usual way. Traffic, light changes, pedestrians with the particular single-mindedness of people who know where they're going. Because numbers tell stories, he said, if you know how to read them. Lily considered this. Like a secret language? Kind of. More like a signature. Something that says who made a thing and when. She looked at the underside of the car again, turned it back over. And he knew your signature? Adrian made the turn onto their street. He figured it out. Is that good or bad? He pulled into their parking spot and sat for a moment with the engine off. The building's exterior light came on automatically, the way it always did, the timer working its indifferent clockwork. I don't know yet, he said honestly. Lily nodded. She got out of the truck and waited on the sidewalk for him, the gray car in her hand, looking at the building with the patience of someone who has decided that if her father doesn't know yet, that's a reasonable state of affairs and she can wait. He locked the truck and came around to her side. They went inside. On the kitchen counter, Werner's dark blue card sat beside the old cream-colored Titan invitation. 2 rectangles of heavy stock side by side, each one representing something that had been set in motion. Adrian passed them without stopping because Lily was already at the refrigerator looking for the pasta container Mrs. Ferraro had given them, and there was dinner to make and homework to check and a night to get through. The things in motion would move on their own time. Tonight, he was in the room. Werner Haas's meeting with Titan's board was scheduled for Tuesday at 10. By Monday evening, it had been moved to 8. Adrian learned this from Werner himself in a text message at 9:40 p.m. while he was washing the dinner dishes. Terse, no explanation, just the time change and the words "things are accelerating." He dried his hands and stood at the kitchen counter and read it twice, and then set his phone down and finished the dishes, because the dishes needed to be done, and reading the text a third time was not going to change what it said. He did not sleep well that night, not badly enough to be dramatic about it. He was in bed, he was horizontal, he drifted in and out in the shallow way that passes for sleep when your mind is doing quiet, continuous work on a problem you've told it to leave alone until morning. At 4:15 he gave up and got up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad, not to write anything, just to have something in front of him. The gray toy car was on the table. Lily had left it there the night before, which she sometimes did, leaving it in whatever room she'd last been thinking in, the way other people leave glasses of water. He picked it up and turned it in his hand, the aluminum warm from the kitchen air, the worn paint thin as paper at the nose. He set it down and drank his coffee and waited for morning. The board met in the 7th floor conference room of Titan Tower, which was a room Adrian had been in exactly twice during his contracting period, once for an initial design presentation and once for a milestone review. and had not thought about much since. It seated 12 around a walnut table that was either very old or very expensive, or both, with a window at the far end that looked out over Fifth Avenue and caught the morning light in a way that was probably intentional and had definitely been considered by whoever designed the room. Werner Haas arrived at 7:50 with a leather portfolio and the unhurried posture of someone who has done difficult things in important rooms before. Titan's board chair, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had chaired the board for 6 years and had the specific kind of institutional patience that comes from having seen several complete cycles of corporate crisis and recovery, met him at the elevator and walked him in herself, which was a signal Werner noted and did not comment on. 7 board members were present. Howard Briggs was there as COO at the far end of the table. The head of legal, a careful man named Stuart Pine, sat to Patricia's left with a yellow legal pad and a pen he didn't use for the first 20 minutes. Richard Mercer was not in the room. Werner noticed this too. He set his portfolio on the table and opened it and began. He was methodical and he was thorough. He had spent 31 years making presentations to boards of companies that were in various states of health and distress, and he understood that what boards responded to, ultimately, was not drama, but documentation. He laid out the documentation. The original contractor agreement with Adrian Vale's name and the T platform designation. The pre-patent design filing with the date and the authorship credit. The amendment record from the digitization process 3 years ago, showing the change in primary inventor designation and the name that replaced it. The change order for the suspension modification, with the cost per unit calculation and the authorization signature. The quality report. The badge log. He put each document on the table as he discussed it, in sequence, building the picture piece by piece the way you build a picture, slowly, and from the foundation. Patricia Osei did not speak during the first 40 minutes. Stuart Pine began using his pen around minute 15 and did not stop. Howard Briggs, who had already known some of this, sat with his hands flat on the table in the posture of someone who is maintaining composure as an act of professional discipline. When Werner finished, the room was quiet for a moment. "Where is this documentation from?" Stuart Pine asked. His voice was the voice of a lawyer, which meant it asked questions without revealing what the question was actually looking for. "A combination of sources," Werner said. "The IP archive maintained by the Automotive Engineers Consortium, the pre-digital filing records at the Federal Patent Office, which are public record. The contractor agreement was obtained through standard IP due diligence research." He paused. "I should be transparent about my interest here. Vantage Group has been in licensing discussions with Titan for the TAP platform. If the authorship record for that platform is inaccurate, it affects those discussions materially. I have a professional obligation to understand what I'm licensing." "And the maintenance technician," Patricia said. It was the first thing she'd said, and she said it quietly. "Mr. Vale, does he know you're presenting this?" "He knows I'm presenting what I know to the board," Werner said. "He asked me to emphasize that his primary concern was the safety issue, not the attribution." Those are his words. Patricia looked at the badge log on the table in front of her. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Howard Briggs. "How long have you known about the quality issue?" she asked. "I received Gerald Chu's report the morning after the launch," Howard said. "I flagged it immediately." "And the attribution question?" A pause. "I had concerns about the contractor agreement situation when I reviewed the quality report. I had not yet connected them formally before this meeting." Patricia nodded slowly. She gathered the documents in front of her into a neat stack, which was a gesture Adrian would have recognized. The thing people do when they're making a decision, and organizing the physical environment is a way of organizing the internal one. "Stuart," she said. "I'll need the morning," he said. "You have it." She looked at Werner. "We'll be in touch before end of day. I'd ask that you keep this conversation confidential until we've had time to review." "Of course," Werner said. He left at 8:47. By 9:15, Richard Mercer had been asked to work from home pending an internal review. He did not come back to the office that day. Adrian was in Bay 7 when Danny Rios came in from the parking lot at 11:30, moving faster than he usually moved, and with the expression he wore when something had happened that he was trying very hard to appear casual about. "Mercer's out," Danny said. Adrian didn't look up from the fuel injector he was cleaning. Where'd you hear that? Keisha in accounting. He was supposed to have a 10 o'clock with the VP of Finance, and he didn't show, and then someone from HR went to his office, and then he wasn't there. Danny paused. Also, apparently, there's a bunch of legal people on the 7th floor. Adrian set the injector down and picked up the cleaning brush. Huh, he said. Danny watched him work for a moment. You know what's happening, he said. It wasn't an accusation, it was just the straightforward observation of someone who has been paying attention. I know some of it, Adrian said. Is it about the launch? Probably shouldn't be discussing this, Adrian said. Okay, but... Danny lowered his voice, even though no one else was in the bay. Is it going to be okay, like, for the company? I've got 2 kids, Adrian. I've been here 4 years. Adrian looked at him then. The genuine worry in it, not gossip, not curiosity. A man with 2 children and 4 years of his working life in this building, asking if it was going to be all right. The company's going to be fine, Adrian said. The car is good. The platform is solid. He held the fuel injector up to the light, checking the spray ports. Whatever else is happening, that's true. Danny nodded, not entirely reassured, but taking what was offered. Okay, he said. Okay. He went back to his station. Adrian cleaned the injector and reinstalled it and moved to the next vehicle, and did not think consciously about the 7th floor, or the documents on Patricia Osei's table, or the man who had not come in to work that morning. He thought about the fuel system in front of him. He thought about what needed to be done, in sequence, and he did it. His phone rang at 2:17. The number was a Titan mainline extension he didn't recognize, which meant an office rather than a personal cell. Mr. Vale? The voice was Patricia Osei's, but he recognized it immediately, the composed, deliberate quality of it. He had heard her speak at the one company-wide presentation he'd attended during his contracting period, and the voice had the same quality now as it did then. The voice of someone who has thought carefully about what they're going to say before saying it. This is Patricia Osei. I'm board chair. I know who you are, he said. A brief pause, and he thought he heard something in it. Not quite surprise, more like an adjustment. Are you available to come to the main tower this afternoon? I'm on shift until 3. After 3, then. I'd like to speak with you directly. He looked at the vehicle on the lift in front of him. All right, he said. After 3. The 7th floor smelled different from the maintenance facility. That was the first thing he noticed. It smelled like filtered air and carpet cleaner, and the faint residual of coffee from a machine that cost more than his truck. The elevator opened to a reception area with the Titan logo on the wall in brushed steel, and a receptionist who looked at him when he came off the elevator with the professionally neutral expression of someone trained not to let their face register anything the visitor wasn't supposed to know. Mr. Vale, she said. Miss Osei's office is at the end of the hall. She's expecting you. He walked the hall. It was a long hall with offices on both sides, some with doors open, some closed. Through an open door on the right, he passed what had been Mercer's office. He recognized it from the nameplate that was still on the door, though someone had turned it so the name faced inward. The office itself was empty in the particular way of a room from which someone has recently and rapidly departed. Not cleaned out, just paused. A jacket still over the back of the chair, a coffee mug on the desk. He kept walking. Patricia Osei's office was the corner one, windows on 2 walls, the afternoon light coming in flat and clear. She was standing at the window when he entered, looking out at the city, and she turned when he knocked on the open door with a kind of measured deliberateness that told him she had been standing there on purpose, composing herself or the situation. She was 61, with close-cropped silver hair and the upright bearing of a woman who had been in rooms that tried to make her feel small and had decided some time ago not to participate in that experience. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. They both sat. I've spent most of today with documents and lawyers, she said, so I'm going to try to be direct with you rather than formal. I'd prefer that, Adrian said. Werner Haas presented evidence this morning that the primary authorship credit for the TAP integrated chassis platform was reassigned without your knowledge or consent during the documentation migration 3 years ago. The reassignment appears to have been authorized by Richard Mercer. She held his gaze. Do you dispute any part of that characterization? No. Were you aware that this had happened? I became aware of the specific nature of it recently, he said. I had known for longer that the attribution situation wasn't clean. I hadn't examined it closely. Patricia nodded. Why not? It was a direct question, and she deserved a direct answer. He thought about how to give her one that was true rather than one that was comprehensible in a boardroom context. I had other priorities, he said. When I left the company, I was dealing with a personal situation that made the patent question feel like it belonged to a different version of my life. I let it go. You let it go, she repeated, not in doubt, just making sure she had it. I signed a work-for-hire agreement. I understood that the IP belonged to Titan. The question was whose name was on it, and at the time, he paused. At the time, I thought the answer didn't change what I was doing or needed to do. Patricia looked at him. It was the look of someone revising a picture they'd had before entering a room. The suspension modification, she said. Yes. You found it and repaired it the night of the launch. Yes. Without reporting it through official channels, without identifying yourself, without requesting anything in return. Gerald Chu filed the quality report, Adrian said. That was the appropriate channel for the safety issue. I just did the physical work. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Out the window, the city did what it did. Traffic, pigeons, the slow diagonal drift of a plastic bag in the upper air. The modification was authorized by Mercer, she said. The cost reduction it represented was real, and it appeared in the margin projections for Q1 projections that went to the board. She stopped, started again. The board approved those projections without knowing the source of the cost reduction. We should have asked more questions. Adrian didn't say anything to that. It wasn't his place to absolve the board or indict it, and he understood what she was doing, not performing accountability, but actually working through it, which was a different thing and harder. What do you want? She asked. He had expected this question and had spent approximately 12 hours preparing not to have a rehearsed answer for it, because rehearsed answers in rooms like this always sound like rehearsed answers. And what he'd found in his preparation was that the honest answer was simpler than any performance of it. The record to be correct, he said, that's the primary thing. The TAP platform documentation should reflect who designed it. And compensation? Legal remedy for the unauthorized amendment? I'm not here to negotiate, he said. I came because you asked me to. If the company wants to address the record formally, I'll cooperate with that process. What that looks like in legal terms, that's between attorneys. Patricia's expression shifted slightly. Most people in your position would come in with a number. I'm not most people, he said, and it didn't come out arrogant. It came out factual, which was how he meant it. She looked at him for a moment with something that was close to respect but not quite, or maybe was respect plus the specific discomfort that comes from having misjudged a situation. There's another matter, she said. Victoria, he said. She didn't react to that. You encountered Ms. Langford at the launch event. You were asked to leave. I was escorted out. Yes. Patricia held his gaze. She made a judgment based on appearance, without information. She didn't know who you were. No one here knew who I was, Adrian said. That was by design. I understand that, but what happened that evening? She paused. She'll want to speak with you. I think that conversation needs to happen. I'm not instructing you to have it. I'm telling you it's going to be requested. Adrian thought about Victoria Langford in the red dress, and Marcus's hand on his shoulder, and Lily looking up at the whole scene with her dark eyes and her gray car. He thought about Lily asking later in the lobby, did she think we were bad guys? All right, he said. Patricia stood, which meant the meeting was over. He stood too. At the door, she stopped him. The car, she said. The Meridian. Whatever else happened, the design is exceptional. The things that make it exceptional are in the work you did in a room with a legal pad 12 years ago. I want you to know that the board understands that, because I'm not sure you've heard it from anyone at this company. He looked at her. The afternoon light was behind her, flattening everything slightly. Thank you, he said. He meant it. It was a simple thing to mean. Mercer went quietly, as much as these things are quiet. The official statement, issued Thursday of the following week, described his departure as a mutual separation following an internal review of engineering operations procedures. It was the kind of language that covered a multitude and revealed nothing, which was the point of it. What happened behind the language was less tidy. Stuart Pine's review had taken 4 days and produced a 40-page document that Adrian was not shown but was described to him in summary by Gerald Chu, who had somehow maintained his position through the whole of it and emerged on the other side with the specific, weary dignity of someone who had told the truth consistently and found that it held. The document established that Mercer had authorized the amendment to the patent record through a deliberate manipulation of the digitization process, flagging Adrian's original file for correction on the basis of a documentation inconsistency that he had himself introduced, then using his administrative authority to push through a revised primary credit designation. The change had been processed by an administrative coordinator who had no reason to question the authority of a VP signature on a documentation amendment. The suspension modification had been straightforward, a cost reduction disguised as an engineering adjustment, authorized through a production change order that used language calculated to avoid triggering safety review protocols. Tolerance optimization. As if tolerances could be optimized by reducing them in a load-bearing component. Mercer had been, in the end, very good at the specific skill of making things look like something other than what they were. It was a useful skill in an industry where margins were thin and decisions were complex, and the people approving budgets were not always the people who understood the engineering. It was the kind of skill that works until it doesn't. His attorney negotiated the separation terms. The terms were not disclosed. The patent record amendment was a separate matter, subject to formal correction through IP channels that moved on their own timeline and were already moving. Adrian was not in the building when Mercer left. He was in Base 7, on the floor under a fleet sedan with a flashlight, checking a suspension geometry issue that Danny Rios had flagged during a routine inspection. It was a Tuesday morning, and the fluorescent metronome above him was doing its thing, and the work was the work, and that was its own kind of steadiness in a week that had not been steady. Gerald came by at noon and stood at the bay entrance with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a man who has things to say and isn't sure how to sequence them. "It's done," he said. Adrian slid out from under the sedan. He took the coffee. "The formal correction?" "Filed this morning. Your name goes back on the TAP platform documentation as primary design engineer. Legal said it'll take a few weeks to work through the filing process officially, but the amendment has been reversed." Gerald paused. "There's a compensation discussion that's going to happen. The board has authorized. It'll be a formal process, but they've already agreed in principle to address the period since the original amendment." Adrian drank his coffee. It was the same machine as always, still running too hot, still tasting faintly of plastic. "Okay," he said. "That's it?" Gerald said. "Okay." "What do you want me to say, Gerald?" Gerald considered him for a moment. "I want you to say something that sounds like it means something to you, because what I'm telling you is that your name is being restored to work. That is the reason this company has a viable flagship sedan. And you're standing there looking like I told you the weather." Adrian looked at the coffee cup. He thought about what it actually meant. Not the legal correction, not the financial resolution, but the fact of it. His name, on his work, in a record that would persist. The thing that was true being true in a place where it could be seen. "It matters," he said. "It's just—" He stopped. Started again. "I've known what the work was the whole time. Knowing my name is on the right document doesn't change what I know about the work. But it changes what other people know," Gerald said. Adrian looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "It does." Juan. Victoria Langford's office was on the 6th floor, which was the executive floor but not the board floor, and which had a different atmosphere from the 7th, more active, more the hum of a company running rather than overseeing. Her assistant, the same young woman with the tablet and headset from the night of the launch, who recognized Adrian and had the specific, slightly stricken expression of someone connecting a past moment with its present consequences, asked him to wait in a chair by the window and went to let her know he'd arrived. He waited for 11 minutes. He looked out the window. He did not prepare what he was going to say, because he had found over the years that preparing for conversations like this produced conversations that sounded like you'd prepared for them, which undermined the point. Victoria came out herself rather than having her assistant announce him, which was a choice. She was in work clothes today, dark trousers, a gray blouse, the kind of professional that required no additional signal. No red. She looked like herself, he thought, more than she had at the launch event, where she had looked like a performance of a version of herself. She looked tired. Not visibly. She held herself the way she always probably held herself, with the upright bearing of someone who has decided not to let posture communicate anything she hasn't chosen. But there was something around her eyes that was tired in the way of someone who has spent a week looking at something uncomfortable and has not been able to look away from it. "Mr. Vale," she said, "thank you for coming." "You asked," he said. She led him into her office and closed the door. They sat, she behind the desk. Then she seemed to reconsider and moved to the chairs near the window, the ones that weren't on opposite sides of a desk, which was also a choice. She folded her hands in her lap, which was something people did when they were trying to stay physically still because the conversation required it. "I don't have a version of this that comes out well for me," she said. "I want to be upfront about that." "Okay," Adrian said. "What I did at the launch event, I made a decision about who you were based on, how you were dressed. I didn't ask who you were. I didn't look at the invitation. I looked at you and I decided you were someone who didn't belong there, and I acted on that decision without any additional information." She said it directly, in the tone of someone who has rehearsed the honesty of it rather than the words. "And I did it in front of your daughter." The last sentence was where her voice changed slightly. "Not broke. Controlled women who have been CEOs for 14 months do not break in professional conversations." But something tightened in it, something that had been worked through alone and was harder to say in the room with him. "I know what I was wearing," Adrian said. "I know what it looked like." "It doesn't matter what it looked like," she said. "That's the point. I was running a company launch, and a man arrived with his child and an invitation with his name on it, and I had him removed. That's what happened. The context around your identity, what you designed, what you did that night in the staging corridor, none of that changes what I did in that moment. What I did was wrong before I knew any of that." Adrian looked at her. He had thought about this conversation in the week since Patricia had told him it was coming, not preparing for it exactly, but considering it, the way you consider a piece of machinery you haven't worked on before, understanding its basic architecture, what it was built for, what it was likely to do under load. He had expected to feel angrier in this room than he did. He felt something sitting across from her, the memory of Marcus's hand on his shoulder and Lily's question in the lobby, the specific flatness of being dismissed by someone who has already made a decision. But anger was not the primary thing, or not pure anger. It was more complicated than that. It was the anger plus the recognition that she was in this chair doing the harder thing rather than the easier one, and that deserved something. "You didn't know," he said. "That's not an excuse." "No," he agreed, "but it's a fact." He looked at his hands, then back at her. "I've done it too. Made a call about a situation without enough information and been wrong. It's a human thing to do. It's not a good thing, but it's human." Something moved across her face. It wasn't relief exactly. It was the expression of someone who has been bracing for impact and found that the impact, while real, did not break what they'd feared it would break. "I want to apologize to your daughter," she said. "Lily, if you think that's appropriate, I understand if you don't." He thought about Lily, the gravity of her, the way she held things, the question she'd asked. Are we going to be okay? Not about the launch night, but about everything, the way children ask large questions in small language. "I'll think about it," he said. "She's 6. She processed it and moved on." He paused. "But I'll think about it." Victoria nodded. "Whatever you decide." The office was quiet for a moment, the city audible at low volume through the window glass. "What happens now?" she asked. "For you, what do you want this to look like going forward?" He had thought about this too, not in the calculating way of someone planning a negotiation, but in the genuine way of someone who has had a period of clarity forced on them and is using it to examine things. "I want to keep working," he said. "Not here necessarily, I haven't worked that out, but I want to keep working in some form, the engineering." "We'd want you to be part of this company," she said, "in whatever form makes sense for your life. That's not an offer that's contingent on this conversation. It's been authorized by the board, but I wanted to say it directly. I appreciate that. He stood because the conversation had reached its natural endpoint, and extending it past that felt wrong to him. She stood too. Ms. Langford. Victoria. Victoria. He considered his next words for a moment. The Meridian is a good car. The people who designed the surfaces, the interior, they did good work. The engineering underneath it is sound, or it's sound now. Whatever else happened, the car is good. He paused. Don't let the rest of this make you unsure of the car. She looked at him. He saw the tiredness in her eyes again, and behind it something that was working to become something else. Thank you, she said. He left. The walk back to the elevator was shorter than the walk in had been, the way return walks always feel shorter, even when they're the same distance. He passed Mercer's office again, the nameplate still turned inward, the jacket still over the chair. Someone would deal with that eventually. These things got dealt with eventually. He took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out onto Fifth Avenue into a November afternoon that was cold and clear, the sky a clean pale blue above the buildings. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment and let the cold air settle on his face. His phone buzzed. Gerald. Full inspection on all 847 production units confirmed. Rollout suspended pending results. ETA 3 weeks. He put the phone away. He thought about Lily, who was at school and would be done at 3:15 and needed to be picked up, and about the pasta from Mrs. Ferraro's that was still in the refrigerator and would make dinner if he added something to it, and about the legal pad in the kitchen drawer with the suspension geometry problem he'd been working on for 3 weeks and hadn't finished. He started walking toward the parking structure. Around him the city moved in its usual way. Indifferent, continuous, the particular noise of a place that does not pause for individual reckonings, that absorbs them and moves on as if they were ordinary, because to the city they are ordinary, one more weight shifting on the scale of a particular life on a particular block on a particular Tuesday in November. But the weight had shifted. He felt it. Not dramatically. Not in the way of film moments that want you to know something significant has happened, with swelling music and a held frame. Just the actual feeling of it, something that had been out of alignment for a long time settling, imperfectly and incompletely but settling into a position closer to true. His name was on his work. That was the thing. That was the actual thing. He found his truck in the parking structure and got in and sat for a moment before starting it, the way he had when he'd called Werner from this same lot, the city visible in slices between the concrete columns. Then he started the engine and drove to pick up his daughter. The formal correction to the patent record was filed on a Wednesday morning in December, 6 weeks after the launch event, during a week when the first real snow of the season came down on the city, in the slow, deliberate way of snow that intends to stay. Adrian was not there when it happened. There was no ceremony, no room, no moment to stand in. A filing went through a federal system somewhere, and a database updated, and the primary inventor designation on TAP-2014-001 changed from one name to another, and the world continued without marking it. That was how these things worked. And Adrian had known that going in and had made his peace with the gap between how significant something is and how significant it looks when it happens. He found out from Gerald the same way he'd found out most things in the past 6 weeks. A text, brief, no punctuation. Done. Official. Your name. He read it at the kitchen table, early morning, Lily still asleep, coffee in front of him. He read it and set the phone down and looked at the snow coming down outside the window. The particular quality of light that snow gives to early mornings in cities, everything slightly diffused, slightly quieter than it should be. He picked up his coffee and drank it. After a while, he got up and made Lily's lunch for school, peanut butter and apple slices and the small bag of pretzels she liked, packed in the order she preferred, which she had specified with great clarity at the start of the school year, and which he had not deviated from since. He put it in her backpack. He started the oatmeal. By the time Lily came out of her room in her school clothes, her hair still uncombed, the gray toy car already in her hand, the oatmeal was ready, and the apartment smelled like brown sugar, and the snow outside the window was still coming down. It's snowing, she said at the window. Yeah. Can we walk instead of drive? He looked at her. The uncombed hair, the car in her fist, the 6-year-old logic that snow is a reason to be outside rather than a reason to stay in. Elena had been like that about weather, had treated rain as an invitation rather than an inconvenience, which had driven Adrian quietly crazy until it didn't, until it was one of the things he missed so specifically he could feel the shape of its absence. Eat first, he said. She ate. They walked. The compensation agreement took longer than the patent correction. These things always do, because money moves through more layers of institutional caution than documentation does. There were attorneys on both sides, and a process that Adrian found tedious in the specific way of processes designed to be tedious. Not difficult, just slow, full of language that said in 40 words what could be said in 4. He had hired a lawyer, a woman named Diane Marsh, who specialized in IP compensation, and who had the efficient, slightly combative energy of someone who enjoys the tedium on his behalf so he doesn't have to. Diane told him in their first meeting, across a desk covered in organized stacks of paper, "You know you have significant leverage here." "I know," he said. "The unauthorized amendment, the production modification, the timing relative to the launch. A court would look at this favorably." "I'm not going to court." She looked at him over her glasses. "You might not need to, but the threat of—" "I'm not going to court," he said again. "I want a fair settlement for the period since the amendment. I want the record corrected, which it already is. I want the production inspection completed properly." He paused. "That's it." Diane looked at him for a long moment. She had represented a lot of clients in IP disputes, which meant she had sat across from a lot of people who had been wronged by institutions and had absorbed years of that specific kind of grievance. The grinding, recursive anger of people who know they were cheated and can't stop touching the fact of it. Adrian Vale did not look like those people. He looked like someone who wanted the thing fixed and intended to get it fixed, and then intended to be done with the fixing. "You could get substantially more," she said. "I know," he said. "Get me what's fair." She got him what was fair. It took 8 weeks and several exchanges of language that Adrian did not read in detail, trusting Diane to flag the parts that mattered. The settlement number was one that recognized 12 years of unlicensed use of an engineering design that had become the structural foundation of a product line generating several $100 million annually. It was not a number Adrian had ever had associated with his name before, and he sat with it for a few days in the way you sit with something that changes the material facts of your life. Not with euphoria, because that's not actually how it feels, but with a kind of recalibration, adjusting your understanding of what the near future looks like. The near future looked like this. Lily's college was paid for. The truck could be replaced. The apartment on Delancey with the left side heater that didn't work could be left for something with 2 bedrooms and heat on both sides, and enough space for Lily to have a room that wasn't also her homework room. These were not dramatic things. They were just things that were now possible that had not been before. And the undramatic quality of them was, he found, what he actually needed. He told Lily about moving when he found the new apartment, a 2-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building in Inwood, with a view of the park and a kitchen that had a window above the sink, which was the thing he'd wanted in a kitchen for years without knowing he'd been wanting it. "Will I have to change schools?" Lily asked. "No, same school, different commute." She considered. "Can I paint my room?" "What color?" She thought about this with the gravity she brought to important decisions. "Gray," she said. "Like the car." He looked at her. She looked back at him, perfectly serious. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." God. He went back to the engineering in January. Not to Titan, not full-time, not in the way of returning to a version of himself that had belonged to a different period of his life. He accepted the advisory arrangement that Patricia Osei had offered, which was 2 days a week, flexible. No obligation to be in the building if the work could be done elsewhere. He had his own desk in the engineering wing, which was on the 3rd floor and smelled like thermal printer paper, and the particular kind of industrial coffee that engineering departments run on universally, in every company, in every city. The desk was in an open space, not an office, which was fine with him. The engineers who worked around him were younger than he was, mostly, mid-20s to mid-30s, The cohort that had grown up with the TAP platform as a given. Not something invented, but something that existed the way load-bearing walls exist, structural and assumed. Some of them had studied it in school. One young woman named Priya, who worked on suspension dynamics and had the focused, slightly impatient energy of someone who has more ideas than ours, had written her graduate thesis on a refinement of the rear suspension geometry that drew on his original design. On his third day, Priya stopped at his desk and put a printed page in front of him. Her thesis introduction, which opened with a paragraph crediting the TAP platform and naming the original designer. His name. "I updated the citation," she said, "when the correction came through. I used the wrong name in the original filing." He looked at the page. His name in a citation in a paragraph that described the TAP platform as a foundational contribution to integrated chassis design. He read it the way you read something you have been told about and still need to see for yourself to believe. "Thank you," he said. "It's accurate," she said, with a small shrug, like accuracy was the minimum expected. She picked up the page and went back to her desk. He sat for a moment, then he opened his laptop and started working. What? The conversation between Victoria Langford and Lily happened in March, on a Saturday, because Lily had decided she wanted it to happen and had told Adrian so with the particular clarity she used for decisions she'd considered fully. "I want to talk to her," Lily said, on a Friday evening, out of nowhere, over dinner. Adrian set his fork down. "Where did that come from?" "I've been thinking about it," Lily said, "since you told me about the apology she gave you." She pushed a piece of broccoli to the edge of her plate, which she always did with the last piece of broccoli. "She was mean to us, and then she was sorry. I think I want to hear the sorry part." "You don't have to," he said. "I know I don't have to. I want to." He looked at his daughter, 7 now, her birthday in February, the party small by her own choice, 5 friends from school, and a cake she'd picked herself from a bakery on Amsterdam Avenue. The same dark eyes, the same direct quality in them. The gray car had been on the table during the party, as it was always wherever Lily was. "I'll set it up," he said. They met at a coffee shop on the Upper West Side, chosen by Lily because it had a window that looked out on the street, and she liked to watch people while she ate, and because it served hot chocolate that she had established as a benchmark against which other hot chocolates were measured. Victoria arrived first and was sitting at the window table when they came in, and Adrian watched his daughter walk toward the table with the straight-back composure of someone who has decided how they are going to be in this moment. Victoria looked at Lily the way she had not looked at her the night of the launch. Actually looked at her, without the categorizing detachment that had operated that evening. She looked at her the way you look at a child when you understand, belatedly, that you failed to do so before. "Hi, Lily," she said. "Hi," Lily said. She sat down and put the gray toy car on the table between them, which was either deliberate or instinctive, and Adrian wasn't sure which. Victoria looked at the car, then at Lily. "I owe you an apology," she said, and she said it to Lily directly, not to Adrian. "At the car event in November, I was rude to you and your dad. I made a decision about you without asking anything about who you were. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Lily studied her for a moment. Children have a specific capacity for detecting whether an apology is genuine that adults lose gradually and never fully recover, some mechanism of unfiltered perception that erodes with socialization. She applied it now, visibly, looking at Victoria with the concentrated attention of someone running a diagnostic. "Were you embarrassed?" Lily asked. Victoria blinked slightly. "Yes," she said. "When I understood what I'd done." "Yes." "Okay," Lily said. She picked up the menu and looked at it, then looked at Adrian. "Can I get the hot chocolate and a scone?" "Sure," he said. Lily looked back at Victoria. "Apology accepted," she said, with the gravity of someone rendering a verdict. "I have hot chocolate here, and it's really good. You should try it." Something in Victoria's face shifted. Not fell apart, but shifted. Some protective arrangement of composure adjusting towards something more genuinely present. "Thank you," she said. She looked at Adrian over Lily's head, a brief look, and he gave her the small nod of a man who has seen something simple and true happen in a coffee shop window seat and doesn't need to add anything to it. They drank their hot chocolate. Victoria tried the scone, the snow that had been threatening since morning started outside the window, coming down in the slow, certain way of snow that intends to accumulate, and Lily pressed her forehead to the glass and watched it fall on the people on the sidewalk below, who were all suddenly walking faster and holding their coats closed. "It's sticking," Lily reported. "It usually does," Adrian said. In April, Priya knocked on his desk again, this time with a tablet and the expression of someone who has been working on something for several weeks and has finally reached the part where they need another set of eyes. "Can I show you something?" she said. He looked at the tablet. She had extended the rear suspension geometry in a direction he recognized, had been approaching from a different angle in his own late-night legal pad work, the problem that had been sitting in the kitchen drawer for months. She had gotten further than he had, which told him something about the quality of her thinking, and she had made an assumption at the third step that he could see immediately was going to cost her at the seventh. "You're loading assumption here," he said, pointing. She looked. "What about it?" "You're modeling for static distribution, but under hard acceleration from a standing start, the dynamic weight transfer shifts the rear loading outside this range, which means the bracket sizing is optimistic," she said immediately, not defensive. Just following the logic, which is what good engineers do. They follow the logic wherever it leads without requiring it to confirm what they wanted. "By about 12%, he said. She took the tablet back and looked at it for a moment, making the adjustments in her head. "Okay," she said. "That's fixable. It just changes the—" She was already in her own head, already solving. She started to walk back to her desk, then turned. "Do you want to work on this together? It connects to the platform architecture in ways that—" She stopped, as if just noticing she was asking the man who designed the platform architecture to work on something related to the platform architecture. "Sorry, that's obvious." "It's not obvious," he said. "I've been away from this for a while. You fixed a chassis defect in a staging corridor at midnight with a salvage component," she said. "You weren't that far away." He almost smiled. "Send me the file," he said. She did. He worked on it that afternoon and took notes home on the legal pad. The same legal pad, 3/4 full now. The suspension geometry problem from the kitchen table finally finding its way into a room where it had company. The thing about what happened, the whole sequence of it, the launch and the staging corridor and the toy car and Werner Haas and Patricia Osai's office and the patent correction and the settlement and the conversations that had needed to happen and eventually did. The thing Adrian kept coming back to, in the quiet of the new apartment, with Lily asleep in her gray room and the park visible from the kitchen window, was how much of it had been set in motion by a small aluminum car rolling across a polished floor. Not the car itself, the number on it. He had engraved that number the night he made the toy, at 2 in the morning in the weeks after Elena died, out of habit. He had not thought about what the habit meant or what it might eventually do. He had just done what engineers do. Cataloged the thing, marked it, left a record. The impulse was so ingrained in him that he'd done it to a toy made for a grieving child without thinking about it, the way you sign your name without thinking about the mechanics of writing. And 12 years later, a man in a good suit had bent down to pick up a rolling toy car and had read that number and had understood in a moment what it contained. Not the story, but the evidence of the story. The proof of it sitting in 3/4-inch letters on the underside of something small and gray and worn smooth by a child's hands. He thought about that sometimes, the way truth has a tendency to surface, not dramatically, not on schedule, but with the patient inevitability of something that cannot stay submerged indefinitely. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps existing until the right conditions allow it to be seen. You can change the name on a document, but you cannot change the fact of who sat in a room with a legal pad and worked a problem through to its solution. The fact persists. It waits. He thought about what Elena had said. "She's going to need you to be in the room." And about the specific irony that being in the room, being the person who showed up for school pickups and homework checks and Saturday morning pancakes and the grade-by-grade accumulation of ordinary life, was exactly what had put him in Bay 7 on the night of the launch, working a night shift job for reasons that had everything to do with being present and nothing to do with proximity to the work that eventually needed him. He had not planned for any of it. He had just tried to be where he was supposed to be. On a Saturday in May, 9 months after the launch event, Adrian drove Lily to a car show on the West Side. Not a Titan event, a general automotive show, the kind that occupies a convention hall for a weekend and draws the full spectrum from collectors to curious families. Lily had asked to go because she had developed, over the winter, a genuine interest in cars that went beyond the gray toy car's sentimental claim on her attention. She wanted to look at engines. She had told Adrian this with the matter-of-fact directness of a child who has made a decision about what she finds interesting and is not asking permission for it. They spent 3 hours in the hall. She asked questions of the exhibitors with an unself-consciousness that Adrian envied and recognized. The specific freedom of not yet knowing that questions can be used against you, that showing interest can look like weakness in the wrong rooms. She asked a man at a vintage muscle car display how the carburetor worked and listened to his answer with focused attention, and then asked a follow-up question that made him pause and look at her differently and then answer more seriously. At noon, they got sandwiches from the food concession and sat on a bench in the hall corridor and ate. Lily held the gray car in her left hand while she ate with her right, the way she always did at meals where her hands weren't both occupied. She turned it over and looked at the number on the bottom. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "If you hadn't put the number on the car, would Mr. Haas have known?" He thought about this honestly. Probably not. Not when he did. Eventually, things were moving. Gerald's report was in the system. Werner was already suspicious, he paused. But the car was the thing that connected it. That made it clear when it needed to be clear. Lily turned the car right side up and looked at it from the front, the nose worn smooth. "So it matters that you made the car." "It matters that I made it with the same habits I make everything with," he said. "I didn't put the number on it because I thought it would matter. I did it because that's what I do. I catalog things. I mark things." "Because you want people to know where things came from," Lily said. Not a question. He looked at her, the sandwich in her hand, the gray car in the other, the hall noise around them, engines being started somewhere, a PA announcement, the general human crowd noise of a Saturday in a building full of things people love. "Yeah," he said. "That's it exactly." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her sandwich. He sat beside her and ate his own sandwich and thought about the legal pad at home, which was now full. The last page written 2 weeks ago, the suspension geometry problem from the kitchen table reaching a solution with Priya's help. The whole pad, a record of 2 years of thinking that had happened in the margins of a different life. He had bought a new one. It was in the kitchen drawer where the old one had been, 3 pages full already. A new problem that had presented itself while he was lying on the floor of Bay 7, which he still visited, even now, once or twice a week, because Gerald had asked him to consult on complex repairs, and because Bay 7 had a quality he was not ready to give up entirely, the fluorescent metronome and the lift that groaned and the particular cold of a garage floor in winter that had been, for 2 years, the floor he knew. The gray toy car sits on Lily's bookshelf now. Not always. She still carries it sometimes, still holds it when she's thinking, still examines the underside with the habitual attention she's had since she could hold it. But it lives on the bookshelf in the gray room in the Inwood apartment, on the second shelf between a chapter book about a girl who fixes robots and a field guide to birds that she had asked for at Christmas and has used more than Adrian expected. It is not a perfect object. The paint is nearly gone at the nose, worn to bare aluminum by years of hands. There is a small dent on the left rear quarter panel from the time it was dropped in a parking lot when Lily was 4 and bounced off the asphalt. The wheels don't spin freely anymore. They turn, but with resistance, some grit in the axle that Adrian has offered to clean out, and which Lily has declined to have cleaned out, for reasons she hasn't fully articulated and he hasn't pushed her to. The number on the underside is still perfectly legible. He had cut it deep, which was the engineering habit again. Mark things in a way that lasts, because the things that need to be found are usually found later rather than sooner. TAP-2014-001-AV. If you know what those letters and numbers mean, you know a story. You know about a man in his 20s at a desk with a legal pad, working a problem from first principles, building something out of physics and patience and the specific stubbornness of a person who believes that the right design is worth the time it takes to find it. You know about a contractor agreement signed without enough attention, and a company that grew on the foundation of that design, and a decade in which the name on the record was wrong. You know about a staging corridor at midnight, and a flashlight and a bracket that was 3.7 millimeters from where it should have been, and what it cost someone to change it, and what it would have cost people who had nothing to do with any of this if it hadn't been found. You know about a woman in a red dress who made a 4-second decision that was wrong, and who had the specific difficulty and courage of sitting across from the man that decision had wronged and saying so directly. You know about a little girl who dropped her toy car on a polished floor in a showroom and changed the course of things, not by doing anything extraordinary, but by carrying with her, always, the evidence of who her father was. If you don't know what the letters mean, you see a child's toy, worn and imperfect, sitting on a bookshelf between a novel and a field guide, in a room painted the color of good weather after rain. Both versions are true. Adrian keeps the legal pad in the kitchen drawer where it has always been. He keeps the window above the sink, which he looks out while he washes dishes, which overlooks the park, and in May shows the trees coming back in stages. First the pale preliminary green, then the real green, dense and various and alive. He washes the dishes after Lily's bedtime most nights. It is a quiet time of day, the apartment settling into its night sounds, Lily's breathing audible from the open door of her room when he passes it on his way to the kitchen. He washes dishes and looks at the park and thinks usually about whatever problem is on the current legal pad. Sometimes he takes the pad out afterward and writes. Sometimes he just goes to bed. He is not a man who has resolved his life into simplicity. There are things that are still complicated. The 2 days a week at Titan, where he sits at a desk in the engineering wing and works on problems with people 20 years younger than him, and occasionally feels the gap between the engineer he was then and the engineer he is now, and occasionally feels no gap at all. The settlement that changed the material facts of his life, and that he is still, in small ways, adjusting to. The conversations with Elena that he has in his head, which are the conversations you have with people who are gone, and which are not grief exactly, not anymore, but something that has settled into the ordinary architecture of his days, present and survivable. There is the specific loneliness of being a single father, which is different from being lonely and which has its own texture. The evenings after Lily is asleep, the Saturday mornings when the apartment is quiet before she wakes up, the school events where he is the single set of hands and the gap where the other set would have been, is not a wound anymore, but is still a shape, still there. He does not have the life he planned. He had planned, at 29, for a particular version of things. The career, the work, the name on the work, the recognition, the years of it building into a record of something significant. He had that, and lost it, and got it back in a form he hadn't planned for. And the life that happened in between the losing and the getting back was everything. The whole thing. Lily learning to walk and then to run and then to ask questions that required full answers. The Bay's 7 mornings, the kitchen table and the legal pad and the cold coffee. Elena's voice in his head asking if he was in the room. He is in the room. That is the thing he knows for certain, the thing he has earned. Not the patent record or the settlement or the advisory desk in the engineering wing, but this. The knowledge that when it mattered, he showed up. He showed up for his daughter, and he showed up for a car that needed someone to see what was wrong with it and fix it without needing credit for the fixing. And those two things are not unrelated. They come from the same place in him, the same stubborn, quiet belief that the work is the work, and it matters whether you do it right regardless of whether anyone is watching. His name is on the design, but his daughter knows where the toy car came from. Of the two, he knows which one he'll think about when it's late and the park is dark outside the kitchen window and the apartment is quiet. The work will outlast the record of it. That is the nature of work that is true. It persists in ways that documentation cannot fully capture, in the structural logic of things that were built correctly, in the specific way a car sits on a road when its chassis was designed by someone who understood what they were doing and cared enough to do it well. And sometimes it persists in smaller ways, in a number cut deep into the underside of a small gray thing, worn smooth by a child's hands, sitting on a shelf in a room the color of quiet, waiting to be found, the way true things wait, patient and exact and entirely itself.